Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the post-noon session of iTech program. The topic of the session will be carbon cycle, carbon footprint, and its estimation. The talk will be delivered by Professor Priyanka Kaushal. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Shivangi. Thank you very much. I could see there is an echo here. Yes. Okay. So welcome, everyone. I think you have a good lunch. I mean, whatever time zone you are right now, but you had a good break. Let me put it this way. And we now start with our next session. Let me just share my screen with you. Okay. Yes. So the topic of my talk today is carbon footprint and its management. And of course, we will quickly go through the carbon cycle as well. And yeah. Right. So let me start this session by just putting a simple question to you that how much carbon right now is there on you? How much of carbon is there that we are carrying at the moment? If I talk about myself, how much carbon is there in my glass frame? How much carbon is there on the chair that I'm sitting in? And how much carbon is there, let's say maybe on the t-shirt or the clothes that we are wearing at the moment? That is the question. So with this question, if I give you a quick, like 10 seconds time to think about it, that what is the carbon footprint of myself right now at this moment? What is our carbon footprint and what it is so important about carbon? Why is it that we are discussing it so often? Okay, so there was a question if we would be sharing the slides. Yes, we will, but we will share the slides only at the end of the training program. Also, I have this announcement to make. MEA, the Ministry of External Affairs, those who have sponsored this project, this training program, sorry, have asked to send us the attendance of the participant to them. Therefore, I request all of you to kindly attend the lecture, attend the training program. I assume that the certificate that they will be issuing toward the end of the training program will have some consequence of your attendance as well. So kindly attend, ensure that your attendance are marked for the training program. Okay, so let's quickly talk about the carbon cycle. Yes. Right. So I assume that we have put our thinking hat on and we have considered or some way have given some value to the net amount of carbon that we are carrying at the moment on our bodies, right? So just hold that thought for a moment and let's try to understand this carbon cycle. Why is it so important that we are talking about carbon so often? And what is this cycle all about? So there is a dynamic equilibrium, as you understand, as we see here, which is there between some of the spheres. In total, we have about, look at it, we have about 5 spheres, and these spheres interact with each other. And these spheres are basically, there is atmosphere, we all know it's the big envelope of gas which is surrounding the Earth. There is a hydrosphere, which is the water bodies. Then there is a cryosphere, which is the frozen part of the Earth, the poles and the Arctics and so on and so forth. Then there is a lithosphere, which is the rigid outer part of the Earth's crust, and this is where the fossils are, right? So this is the zone where the fossil exist. And then there is a biosphere, which is where all the living organisms live. So these 5 spheres, and it will be absolutely right in common man's term if we combine this 3, 4, and 5 and call it Earth, the planet, the surface. So these 5 spheres actually interact among each other. There is a continuous flow, take, uptake, give and take of carbon that is happening. Life is nothing but carbon. These are all organic molecules are made out of carbon. So if we study, if we go down to our own molecular level, we are made up of carbon too. All living organisms are made out of carbon, right? So therefore, it is important that we take account of this carbon. So if you look at it, there is something which is, there is an exchange happening. It comes back in the atmosphere from the biosphere, primarily from the photosynthesis route. So it releases oxygen, takes up CO2, and there is an equilibrium. Similarly, oceans also do the same thing. They also take up carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, right? And at certain time they give back as well. So there is a dynamic equilibrium in terms of various mechanisms are happening. But what is important here is that there is a dynamic equilibrium. When I say dynamic equilibrium, it is because at some point it go up, it goes down. Over a period of time, maybe over a month, over a season, over a year, it comes to an equilibrium, and then again the cycle is repeated. So there is a band, there is an upper limit and a lower limit between which the carbon percentage varies. The net amount of carbon would remain constant. This is the very fundamental law of conservation of mass. So whatever is the total amount of carbon which is there, that remains constant. It just changes its position from atmosphere to biosphere to lithosphere to cryosphere, wherever it may change its position, but the net amount of carbon would remain constant, right? The whole problem that we understand today is primarily when this dynamic equilibrium is disturbed. That means that the amount of carbon that has been historically stored at certain sphere, we are actually going beyond that, right? And this is what is the major issue. So look at it. This is what I was trying to explain, that there is a, it goes through a cycle. It goes up and it goes down. It goes up and it goes down. But ideally, it should have remained like this. But this is not happening. It goes through a cycle. That is okay. That's the dynamic cycle I was talking about. The up and down, the maximum and minimum that you see here is the dynamic equilibrium. That is okay. That would be there. But this steady increase, now if I have to draw a single line and I have to express it, then it would be, and if I draw it around the mean value, it will be a straight line like this. Now that is bad. Ideally, it should have been like this. Now this steady increase, right? And we're talking about CO2 ppm, where? Atmosphere, right? So this is atmosphere. We are more concerned about the concentration of carbon in the atmosphere. The net carbon, if I sum up all the carbon in all the 5 spheres, the value will always be a constant number. My question here is, or my concern, or everybody's concern today, is that the amount of carbon which is now getting stored in the atmosphere is more than what it historically has been. And because of which carbon dioxide molecule, we all know, has a GHG potential, has a warming effect, because of which a lot of changes are happening. The climate change is happening, and there are many potential threats that are there, right? So sea level rise and other extreme weather conditions we have been experiencing it will become more frequent, and the level of sea level rise could be could be to a level where we could see that some of the cities could be completely submerged, right? So those threats are there. Therefore, it is important that we control or limit the amount of CO2 which is going into the atmosphere. CO2 is the prime anthropogenic source. We understand anthropogenic basically means coming from human activity. So we have to control that. One biggest source of energy, when we're talking about energy storage also and carbon storage also,
Ma'am, you're not audible. Ma'am, you're not audible.
And give oxygen back, right? So one of the solution is to go for lots of forestation. Let's increase the number of forests that we have, or number of trees that we have. That's a very intuitive process to do so. They have their own pace at which they work. Also, how our land use has also changed has an impact on it. We have a limited amount of land, and how much of it we can actually give to for reforestation, like we take away and go for establishing forest in it, that need to be checked, that need to be evaluated. That is one. But this is one solution that we can think of, which is probably naturally available to us, and maybe simple technology. There's no technology as such. All you have to do is to plant trees. We can think of that. But anyway, let's get back to the carbon cycle. So we see that at the mean value of CO2 concentration is increasing. And this is the reason that we try to bring back the historic or pre-industrial era CO2 concentration. We have almost doubled since then. And it is in ppm level. I mean, if you look at it, is a very small number. It is in parts per million. So 1 part in a million is what is the concentration of CO2. But even in ppm, the levels have doubled since our pre-industrial era. We discussed the pre-industrial era. That's when coal was kind of played a very important role. And before that, what was the CO2 concentration and what is the CO2 concentration today, right? And therefore, we need to maintain a balance. The whole idea there is, in coming classes, in the coming days, we will be hearing about CCUS and all those technologies that are put in place to ensure that the carbon is limited or controlled amount of carbon, or net zero means no amount of carbon goes in, no net amount of carbon goes into the atmosphere. So all those measures would be discussed. The problem is primarily coming from the lithosphere. Now, what is lithosphere? Lithosphere is the sphere where this whole fossil fuel is deposited. So what is happening? We are extracting these fossil fuels, mining these fossil fuel, and we are burning it, using it for various applications, power plants, steel, cement, so on and so forth, right? And as a result of which, because they are carbon, they release CO2 and they release water. All the hydrogen is converted into water. And both of them are GHG. They have a GHG potential. So both of them has a warming impact. Water stream as well as CO2, right? And because the huge amount of fossil that we are extracting, we are mining and we are burning, because of which, say, now this is the X amount of carbon we have taken, we have combusted, and we are releasing certain amount of all the X carbon goes is there in the form of CO2. All amount of carbon is going into the atmosphere. So we are digging it out from the lithosphere and we are putting it into the atmosphere. That is the problem. We have to go back. Ideally, we should go back to the level of pre-industrial concentration, pre-industrial era concentration of CO2. Okay, so that is ideally what we should be doing. So if I have to summarize the entire carbon cycle, we see that there is a dynamic equilibrium, and this consistent incremental growth of carbon in the atmosphere reservoir is a major contributor of climate change. There are other GHG potent gas as well, like as I told you, steam is there, methane is there, but then their concentrations are far too lower than that of CO2. The CO2 concentration, which has doubled, others have not doubled, right? Or they're in even more smaller in amount in the atmosphere. So we will not be talking about that, and we'll be focusing more on our climate, on carbon dioxide. And to quickly see that why everybody is talking about this carbon cycle, I have a small video to share with you. Okay.
Is it hearing a lot about global warming and words like
Shivangi, is it visible?
Yes,
like
ma'am.
carbon footprint, climate shift, carbon dioxide, and climate change. But what is carbon? And what does it have to do with climate change? Carbon is everywhere in the ecosystem, and it is always moving. Some of it is floating in the atmosphere. Plants absorb carbon from the air and store it in their bodies. When animals eat plants, they eat carbon. And when something bigger eats those animals, they're having a carbon snack too. But that carbon won't stay still for long. When an animal poops or something dies, carbon moves around again. Some of it is held in the soil for a while. And eventually, most of it ends up back in the atmosphere. The same type of process happens in the oceans too. Most of the carbon dioxide gas on Earth is actually dissolved in ocean water. Some of the carbon from dead plants and animals was trapped underground, and over millions and millions of years, it turned into coal, oil, and gas. And that's pretty much how the system works. Some carbon has stayed deep underground for millions of years, but the rest moves around the ecosystem from the air to plants to animals and back into the atmosphere. And that's the story of the carbon cycle. Well, it was, until we came along. We've been cutting down a lot of forests that used to absorb carbon from the atmosphere. And we've been digging up carbon from deep underground and burning it for energy. Doing that pumps that old carbon back into the air. By getting rid of plants and burning lots of fossil fuels, we've changed the system. The atmosphere is filling up with carbon faster than plants and oceans can absorb it. All this extra carbon in the air is like a blanket around the Earth that traps in extra heat from the sun. And things are changing all over the globe. But now that we know that we are part of the system, we can do things to keep it in balance. We can stop chopping down forests and plant trees. We can use less energy. Even better, we can find other sources of energy and leave the ancient carbon underground and out of the atmosphere.
Right. So, yeah, that was about the carbon cycle very briefly. And let's now see, why we are all talking about it. I think this summarizes it very well. As you can see in here, this has been the historic concentration of CO2. We were about 280 ppm, more or less, 280 ppm, and we have data from as old as 1000 AD that we're talking about. And we could see there are some fine scientific data available, tools and technique available by which we can take the sample, could study it, and we have come to a conclusion, very solid conclusion, that the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere over the last 1000 years had been at about 280 ppm, right? But after, as you can see here, after industrialization took place, after the Industrial Revolution, there is a phenomenal growth. There's almost an exponential growth in terms of CO2 concentration over the last 100 years, even more, right? And this is very alarming. And I don't think I need to explain it any further. And if you want to see what is the present level, the life concentration of CO2, there are certain websites available. This is one where you can go and check what is the concentration of CO2 right now. So that was all about the carbon cycle that I could cover very briefly. The next thing is about carbon footprint. That means every product, every service, every product means every product, right? That means the computer, the pen, the paper, the clothes that you are wearing, shoes, you name it, that's there in front of you, your door, the windows, whatever it is, the paints, the wallpapers, right? Versus other things like electricity, petrol, diesel, gas, whatever it is, all services and all products that we are using has undergone certain kind of processing. Cement, building that we are living in, right? So if you study how cements are made, or if we study how jewelry, gold for that matter, or steel, plates and other devices, the crockery that we use, all of them, there is a raw material which is there, and there is a processing that happens to that raw material before we end up getting the final product. And therefore, this final product has embodied some amount of, it has already taken in some amount of energy and has already emitted some amount of GHG while it is being processed and getting ready, right? So therefore, everything has a carbon footprint. The whole idea is to make things carbon less intensive, or ideally carbon neutral. That's why we are talking about neutrality. Now, I'm putting another question to you, that what is the carbon footprint of, I'm assuming that everybody is wearing a shirt or a t-shirt or a cotton t-shirt. What is the carbon footprint of your clothes? How is your cloth made? Where has it come from? Many of us can check the level at the back of the collar, and you could see that it is made in certain places. It is made in such and such place, and probably from there it has traveled all the way from that part of the world to the retail store near your house. So therefore, what is the carbon footprint of the t-shirt that you are we are wearing. So let's have a quick look at a video. I think a video communicate things more extensively. Yeah, let me share it with you. Right. So yes, so that was very briefly what right. So that was very briefly about the history of the the journey of our cotton t-shirts, like how cotton is produced. And we will see another video where we will be talking about this cotton only, because I think we have spoken or will be speaking a lot about electricity in the coming classes, but it is important to see some of the other examples as well, other commodity. And I think a t-shirt is one such thing that everybody is associated with, and how it is how carbon intensive this whole t-shirt business is. But right from growing of the cotton, as you understand, it takes a lot of water. Also, it takes a lot of resources, fertilizers and all those stuff, and pesticides to grow them and to care for them. And yes, so to see how much carbon is been emitted while in the process of making the t-shirt. Now, the next video that I'll be showing you, it talks a bit more about the processing part of it. Now, how the t-shirts are made, what happens in a factory. Now, what I suggest is, no exam, of course, please go through this video very carefully and try to identify what are the energy intensive and emission intensive processes or steps. Again, we are again looking at t-shirt industry itself, but try to understand or list out mentally, maybe if you don't have a pen and paper, that what are the energy intensive processes that we could hear or identify here, not just energy as well as emission, right? And then we will see what is how to calculate this carbon footprint thing. Yes, so I'll show you another video. Just give me a second. Okay, just give me a second.
Consider the classic white t-shirt. Annually, we sell and buy 2 billion t-shirts globally, making it one of the most common garments in the world. But how and where is the average t-shirt made? And what's its environmental impact? Clothing items can vary a lot, but a typical t-shirt begins its life on a farm in America, China, or India, where cotton seeds are sown, irrigated, and grown for the fluffy bolls they produce. Self-driving machines carefully harvest these puffs. An industrial cotton gin mechanically separates the fluffy bolls from the seeds, and the cotton lint is pressed into 225-kilogram bales. The cotton plants require a huge quantity of water and pesticides. 2,700 liters of water are needed to produce the average t-shirt, enough to fill more than 30 bathtubs. Meanwhile, cotton uses more insecticides and pesticides than any other crop in the world. These pollutants can be carcinogenic, harm the health of field workers, and damage surrounding ecosystems. Some t-shirts are made of organic cotton, grown without pesticides and insecticides, but organic cotton makes up less than 1% of the 22.7 million metric tons of cotton produced worldwide. Once the cotton bales leave the farm, textile mills ship them to a spinning facility, usually in China or India, where high-tech machines blend, card, comb, pull, stretch, and finally twist the cotton into snowy ropes of yarn called slivers. Then yarns are sent to the mill, where huge circular knitting machines weave them into sheets of rough grayish fabric, treated with heat and chemicals until they turn soft and white. Here, the fabric is dipped into commercial bleaches and azo dyes, which make up the vivid coloring in about 70% of textiles. Unfortunately, some of these contain cancer-causing cadmium, lead, chromium, and mercury. Other harmful compounds and chemicals can cause widespread contamination when released as toxic wastewater in rivers and oceans. Technologies are now so advanced in some countries that the entire process of growing and producing fabric barely touches a human hand. But only up until this point. After the finished cloth travels to factories, often in Bangladesh, China, India, or Turkey, human labor is still required to stitch them up into t-shirts. Intricate work that machines just can't do. This process has its own problems. Bangladesh, for example, which has surpassed China as the world's biggest exporter of cotton t-shirts, employs 4.5 million people in the t-shirt industry, but they typically face poor conditions and low wages. After manufacture, all those t-shirts travel by ship, train, and truck to be sold in high-income countries, a process that gives cotton an enormous carbon footprint. Some countries produce their own clothing domestically, which cuts out this polluting stage. But generally, apparel production accounts for 10% of global carbon emissions. And it's escalating. Cheaper garments and the public's willingness to buy boosted global production from 1994 to 2014 by 400% to around 80 billion garments each year. Finally, in a consumer's home, the t-shirt goes through one of the most resource-intensive phases of its lifetime. In America, for instance, the average household does nearly 400 loads of laundry per year, each using about 40 gallons of water. Washing machines and dryers both use energy, with dryers requiring 5 to 6 times more than washers. This dramatic shift in clothing consumption over the last 20 years, driven by large corporations and the trend of fast fashion, has cost the environment, the health of farmers, and driven questionable human labor practices. It's also turned fashion into the second largest polluter in the world after oil. But there are things we can do. Consider shopping secondhand. Try to look for textiles made from recycled or organic fabrics. Wash clothes less and line dry to save resources. Instead of throwing them away at the end of their life, donate, recycle, or reuse them as cleaning rags. And finally, you might ask yourself, how many t-shirts and articles of clothing will you consume over your lifetime? And what will be their combined impact on the world? When we produce TED-Ed videos about the environment,
Right. So that was very quickly about the processing of the cotton from the field till it takes the shape of a t-shirt and reaches our home. So I'm sure you must have identified some of the processes, but I have listed down some of the processes as well. And I could say that there were pesticides and insecticides that were used. So there's a factory, there is an entire industry that produces pesticides and all those insecticides. So a part of the energy and the GHG that has been emitted in the production of those pesticide and insecticides are also being loaded or will be loaded on the piece of t-shirt. So let's say we're looking at one piece of t-shirt, what is the carbon footprint? So the sum footprint will come from the usage of pesticide and insecticide, and then the farm machines. How many farm machines, what kind of farm machines were used during the agricultural phase of it for the production of those cotton wool. So that will also go into, will be loaded on the t-shirt. Then once it was grown after harvesting, it was de-seeded. Again, there is a machine that is used. And then it goes to a factory where it is pressed, kneaded, and all those stuff. You saw it was made into slivers, they say, the rope thing. So the processing and the equipments, the machines that we use for processing and pressing and making the threads out of it. So there is all the machines that we use, the iron and steel that have been used to make those machines. There are very few that I'm listing. There are many more in the process. These are the major ones that we saw. Then it went to the knitting industry where knitting took place. So there is electricity that has been used there. What is the kind of electricity? If the electricity is fossil, then it has its own GHG emission loaded to it, how much amount of energy we use. The knitting machine itself, it has been made, I'm sure would be made out of iron or steel or any of the metals that have been mined. So the mining part of it is also loaded in this t-shirt. Then after it is knitted, it is dyed. And you saw what are the kinds of dye that are most popularly used. So the dyeing industry, I mean this coloring industry, when they are produced in their own factory, again, electricity and wastewater is generated. So that is loaded. And the wastewater, which is generated this time in this factory when the fabric was dyed. So there is wastewater. And then a very major part of it, then the processing part of it where your stitching is there. Again, there are those machines that are used. And then finally, it is transported from the factory. You saw it's in India, China, Bangladesh. From there, via the sea route, the ship that has been used, you understand those big vessels, till it reaches the port. Now they ended at port, but from port, it is again picked up by the load trucks, and these trucks take them to the mall or the shop. So this is how a t-shirt reaches our shop, and from shop you pick it up and you buy and you pay for it. But the journey that the cotton has made from the farm, from the first seeding and sowing of it till it reaches your your household, it has embodied, it has taken so much of carbon and so much of emissions onto it. So this is the carbon footprint of the t-shirt, or the single t-shirt that you are using. And this is how we calculate or estimate the carbon footprint of any commodity. Similarly, if you're producing electricity, you calculate what is the carbon footprint of the single, we call it the functional unit. So this unit is very important. We are calculating on what? For example, in the textile industry that we just saw, we were calculating it on single piece of t-shirt. Similarly, when you are doing it for electricity, you calculate 1 unit of electricity, 1 kilowatt hour, that is 1 unit. How much energy or carbon it has emitted. If you are in if you are in a hoteling business, let's say restaurants and hotel, then you calculate it per customer. Maybe it's up to you how you are calculating it. Are you calculating per customer? You may do it per customer, like how many customers are coming in your restaurant or in your hotel, and then what are the various activities that you are doing. There is check-in, the laundries that happen, the garbage that is created, the food and how we are handling it, the electricity that is used, the transport facility that we are providing. So everything is accounted for, and we calculate it either at the end of the year or at the end of the day, some timeline, and then we come up with an average value that per customer or per resident who are checking in, this is my carbon footprint. If you are if you're running a restaurant into a food business, maybe it could be calculated per meal. So every day, 100 meals you are serving or 1,000 meal you are serving. What are the various activities that you are involved in, setting up the table, the lighting, the dishes that we do, cleaning and all those stuff. So you first lay out all the activity, and for each small and big activity, whatever we are doing, we calculate the process which are happening behind that. So all the data and everything, we'll be talking about it tomorrow onward. But today was just to give you an idea that how these numbers come from. Say this is the carbon footprint of a certain commodity. It has taken everything from its inception, we call it for its lifetime, from where it was conceived till it is disposed of. So till that time, how much energy, how much carbon, how much emissions it has, because of it, it has happened, is accounted for or is calculated for. That is carbon footprint. Right. And then that's the reason people are now talking about carbon neutrality. That means we know that we have already pumped in lots of carbon in the atmosphere. We are at more than 400 ppm. Therefore, we have to take action so that we are not pumping more hydrogen, we are not pumping more carbon into the atmosphere. What is it that could be done? So now people are talking about carbon neutrality. Now, carbon neutrality is all about, as you can see here, zero net impact on the GHG climate forcings. So all the GHG emissions that are happening, we try to limit that. There will be some emission for sure. So this is the reason in the morning I was discussing that this is the reason why we say that nuclear is a very clean energy option. Because when you operate nuclear, please pay attention to what I'm saying. When you operate nuclear, I'm not saying when you are commissioning or coming up with a nuclear plant, but when you operate a nuclear plant, that means when a nuclear power facility starts producing electricity, it doesn't emit GHG, because the mechanism by which energy is generated in a nuclear power plant is not by combusting a fossil fuel, it is by a nuclear reaction. So when it is producing electricity, when it is in the production phase, it is not emitting GHG, right? So therefore that it makes nuclear a very clean option, right? So now all our activities, all the businesses are now talking about carbon neutrality. There's a thing called carbon negativity. Carbon negativity is a bit more optimistic than carbon neutrality. Carbon neutrality means zero carbon, and carbon negative means that you're actually taking out the the carbon from your system and you're making it negative from a certain value, right? So negative is a little far-fetched, but let's talk about carbon neutrality. If you go in a phase manner, if you take a step, then of course you have to pass through carbon neutrality. That means zero carbon before you go and talk about negative carbon. So let's focus more about the carbon neutrality part of it. So many industries, many companies, many agencies are now going for carbon neutrality, right? And this is when they try to, and the whole idea of this carbon management, we're talking about carbon management as well, how to manage this whole emission business, right? So they are trying to internalize in our own operation the cost associated with climate change impact due to carbon emissions because of their own operations as well. Now, look at it. I talked about it yesterday as well, and I'm repeating it again today, that if we have to do this ITEC in person before this pandemic, as you understand, many of your colleagues probably have come to India to all the host institution, and the training would have been delivered in person. Now, there is a huge amount of carbon that was released because of the travel that we do, the air travel that all of us would have been doing at that point of time, right? So every action that we are proposing, every action that we are taking, what is the emission coming out of it? What is the carbon footprint of the process? So the plane that you are boarding, the plane also has its carbon footprint, right? So maybe over its life, very small, very minuscule, maybe over its lifetime, like from the day the aeroplane was commissioned, to the last day when it has delivered its services, come to an end of its life, how many to and fro movement it has done. And of that, let's say it has done 100, 200, 1,000 or 1 million, whatever, right? And one such was yours. So 1 million, if it has done like 1,000 such journey, then one journey, 1,000 part of the load would happen to this particular journey, this particular itinerary that you have taken to travel from your home country to Delhi, let's say. right? So all of this is accounted for, and then we, at the end of the day, we sum it. So the companies are now what they are doing, all industries, all of them. I mean, you start with the power industry, the cosmetic industry, the textile industry, the service sector, the hoteling business, all of them are now trying to account for their carbon, how much carbon they are emitting, how much carbon they are releasing. Right? And why they are doing so? Why is it? And now you see that there is almost a race to to become carbon neutral. It is it has become a kind of a status symbol now, right? Because when you go for carbon neutrality, your businesses profit because of the policy push. So we are carbon neutral. The consumers are also becoming more and more aware, and that in a way give them there's a scope of profit. The sense that there is a scope of profit. And then sometimes they do it because of the civil responsibility. They have been in a very dirty business. They know that, for example, mining, if I talk about, or steel industry, if I talk about, it is a very carbon intensive or GHG intensive process. So they feel like they have this responsibility. There is a moral responsibility that they have to make their business carbon neutral. Environmental commitments, sometimes even at the very onset of when a company or a service is about to start, they say that they have certain environmental commitment. They come in black and white, and it also shows a leadership quality because there are very few who are doing it. So you see that you could lead the entire carbon neutral thing. So therefore, they are jumping onto this bandwagon, if I may say so. And sometimes, as I told you, the civil responsibility and to appease guilt pretty much go hand in hand. That is, you feel that you have been responsible for all these emission. Therefore, it's your, it's your turn to correct it. And why should we be carbon neutral? I think we have discussed it too much in detail. That there are scientific evidences are there that we should work toward it. That this is it. We have to work toward it, and we have to internalize the cost of climate change, and we want to voluntarily contribute to it. There is, if we look at the market part of it, it is not really regulated as of now. It is still an unregulated. There are no regulation about the carbon market, at least for the international treaties kind of thing. COP has been trying it for many times. There are some there are some carbon trade available internally in the country itself or between companies, but to a larger extent, it is still an unregulated market, right? And I'll it is still an unregulated market, but people are taking it as a voluntarily basis, that they are voluntarily making their carbon announcements. They are disclosing their carbon footprint, and they're also announcing what measures they have taken to bring down their carbon footprints, right? And how they are making their entire supply process more and more green, right? So this is what the carbon management is all about. But if you look at the supply chain, because we talked about various businesses, right? So when we talk about any business, of course, it has its own supply chain from where they are procuring the raw material and what is the finished product that they are passing on, maybe if they're intermediaries or if it's the final product to the customer. So very first thing that they have to look after, and this is what management is all about, is the space utilization, so land use, how you are using your space. And as you can see here, research by Forbes find that shipping containers sailing across the ocean from Asia are 24% empty. So you have this huge ship, textile, t-shirt, we saw the example of t-shirt. So when it is coming from one part of the country and it is traveling to the other part of the world, right? And already there's so much of carbon intensity and GHG emission has happened in erecting that vessel and then running it all the way from one part of the world to the other. It makes no sense that those containers should be empty. Fill it up. Take as much as you can. So 24% emissions, I mean, even if I assume a linear relationship, 24% emission would have been immediately brought down on all the commodities that are being transferred. So let's say in that vessel, in that ship, if you were in a position to carry 100 items, right, and you carried only 76 items into it, so those 24 items So whatever is the carbon footprint is now loaded on those 76 items only. Had it been 100% or 100 items, all the space have been utilized, then that carbon emission would have been loaded on those 100 items. So individually, the numbers would have gone down. It's all playing with the numbers, basically. And as you can see here, this means that every year, some 61 million TEUs of container are shipped unnecessarily, costing tens and billions of dollars and emitting 120 million tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Small, it's a small numbers, small is beautiful. You club them together and you come up with a very big number, because here we are talking about the global business that is happening. Similarly, material management, that was about space, how you manage your space. That was one example. Space could be in terms of office space as well, because if you are unnecessary, let's say you are lighting up a space or you are air conditioning a space, unnecessarily air conditioning the entire room and big rooms where there are hardly two people sitting make no sense. So space management is very important. You could save a lot as a portfolio, as your carbon portfolio, because as I told you, it reflects your leadership quality. So many of the companies are now reporting, they're taking it as a carbon as a portfolio, and they see that what are the various opportunities where you can reduce your carbon footprint. So space utilization is one, and second is the material management, right? So every product, most of the product, if it's a product, they come in a package. So what is the packaging material that we are using? So if you're using plastic, for example, I don't think I need to talk about plastic. We all know the kind of havoc it has created over the globe. So this corrugated packing material, as you can see it here, made out of board, is used now. A few years back, it was all plastic, but now we have moved to this board-based packaging. Many of these e-platforms where you do the shopping, right? They have moved from plastic to this board-based packaging, right? And this is just to give you a number. Emission from plastic production and incineration could account for 56 gigatons of carbon between now and 2050. According, this is one of the he's the head of the Center for International Environmental Law. Not all, I mean, even here, when we're talking about this board-based packaging system, it is not all good. I mean, the quality equally matter, because if you are compromising for a low quality thing, it could be that it is broken midway and then you have to repackage it. So you end up doubling your carbon footprint. Look at it this way, right? So good quality corrugate material is equally important. That is about your material management, how you are managing. I just very briefly, because it's too little time to talk about everything in detail, talked about that part, what probably all of us have witnessed. But material management is in everything. Look at it. The way nanotechnologies are picking up. Why is it that we are talking about nanotechnologies if the phenomena is surface? Solar panel, we have all seen it. We all know how it looks like when we extract energy from sun. So the panel material, when we made it, everything happens at the surface, and everything happens within a nanometer of depth. So there's no point making the surface more thicker or more fatter than few nanometers deep. There's no point in going even in millimeter. Centimeter is too much, right? So that is the material management, that instead of using 100 grams of something, if the same amount of service could be extracted from just 1 gram, why to waste 99 grams? So that 99 grams could have been used in making other such replication of such material. So material management is very important. So I gave you two examples. One is how modules are made, the solar modules, and in packaging. So space management, material management is important if we want to bring down our carbon footprint of whatever commodity that we are using. And second is the strategic analysis, right? And here you can see the first step to improve carbon footprint, look at your supply chain to ensure and analyze the information. All this data would be important. If you look at IKEA, for example, right? They are one of the biggest furniture giant in the world. So some of their product line comes with an announcement, with a certificate, with a stamping that the wood and the materials are sourced from a sustainable forest, What does that mean? And this is one of their attempt to bring the footprint, carbon footprint, GHG footprint of that particular line of furniture. I'm not saying all of them come with that certification or that stamping, but there is a line available, right? So there is one line of furniture available with them, which says that they have sourced it from a sustainable forest. That means they have ensured that they have not over extracted the raw material from that forest. So that was one step as we talk about. These are strategic decisions that you have to take. Starbucks, as you see here, they are the one who are a coffee giant, we all know, and they have come up with many such very, very small step actions, but very big impacts, wherein, as you can see here, you buy a reusable cup with them at a very nominal price of $1, right? I know when I was a student there in US that they had a policy that if you bring in your own cup, they sell it to you, the coffee was 5 cents cheaper. So instead of taking a paper cup from them, you bring your own cup. It was located in the university premises itself. You bring your own cup, you take a cup of coffee, and they give you a 5 cents discount on that coffee, because and the contribution that we were doing was huge. We were not taking those paper cup, and we all know how paper are made. So these are the strategic analysis. You have to analyze it. You have to understand your customer. You have to see what are the major emission points in your supply chain, who you are procuring from. You could only assure from what is happening in your factory. But if you are a conscious business, you would also take care of that from where whosoever you are outsourcing, from where whosoever you are procuring from, what is the kind of business line they have, right? Whether they are as environmentally conscious as you are or not. So all those things have to be considered, right? And the most important thing, we're talking about gate to gate. That means what is happening within your own premises. From the raw material that comes into your premises to the finished product that leaves your premises. It could be electricity. Let's say the coal came in and the electricity goes out, because what is coming in as a raw material is the fuel. What is going out as the finished product is the electricity. So inside a power plant, if I look at it, make your carbon inventories. That means from the point coal is delivered to you, each and every step, how much of energy I'm using, how much of material I'm using, how much of emission I'm doing. These three things. Three heads, basically. There will be many things that will come under it, right? So the space that you are using to store it, the kind of storage facility that you have built, the temperatures that you are maintaining inside it, right? So energy that you are using, material that you are using, and the emissions that are happening because of it. All these steps you have to consider and make your own inventory, because only when you know, that will help you identify your weakest point or your most carbon intense point. Unless the inventory is not there, it's very difficult to manage or to say that, this is the opportunity where I can reduce my emission. This is my very carbon intensive process in my entire supply chain. This is my most carbon intensive location or point, and I have to do something about it. But to identify what is that carbon intensive process, you have to maintain your inventory. Therefore, inventories are very important. Right? And as you can see here, there are basic guidelines for preparing a CO2 inventory. There are guidelines, there are protocols available. We'll be discussing about it, and we need to follow that protocol. Otherwise, what will happen for the same, if we don't go by the protocol, the internationally accepted protocol, if we don't know that, then we will all end up reporting different values for the same service. Right? So therefore, it is important that we follow those protocols, those methodology, and report accordingly. So decide what is more relevant to the core operations. Understand a complete audit to justify whether emissions are included, all the emissions are included or not. Be consistent, you keep on collecting the data. Make the process of transparent by noting methodologies and important assumptions. And be transparent. I mean, the more transparent we are to our, to our customers, it helps you in in your larger process. That is important. And use the most precise calculation available. That means developing your own inventory and updating it and going as per the protocol and doing it as per the protocol is the bottom line. If you have the inventory ready, all the every country, when it reports its emission, it needs to have its inventory data. If any country, India or Nigeria or Ethiopia or Azerbaijan, if you are saying this is my emission, this is my annual emission, this is my contribution in global warming, contribution or no contribution, even when you say I have a zero contribution, that number zero has to be calculated, and that calculation comes from inventory. Only when you maintain the inventory, every industry, every service, every action is noted for. Schools, for example, it's a service sector. Hospital is a service sector, but it has its own carbon footprint. So we have to account for the carbon footprint. We have to make a register for it. So this is the inventory. Some data are available for the countries which doesn't have its own data. There are international data banks where we can take the data to have the first estimation, to start the process, right? And carbon reduction and offset is one process. Offsetting is, I will not talk much about the offset part of it. It is an intermediary step. Ultimately, we have to make it negative, or we have to make it neutral. But offset means you know that you cannot stop the emission at the moment because of profits and so on and so forth. But whatever you are doing, you are buying a green portfolio for it, right? So you try to offset it. So offset is one way, and there would be an entire session on this carbon offsetting part of it. Some of the major recommendation, as you can see, carbon offset is the first step. Even before you do anything, you just know how much you are emitting and you try to buy some green, maybe electricity, and there are tools that are available by which you try to offset it, right? Inventories, very important. Calculators, very important for process that you are using. Let's say the dyeing process, the coloring process. So there are standard values given for it. To start from that process, start with those numbers to estimate, come up with your first estimate. So that is important, that you start the process of creating your own inventory. This is very important. Offsetting, one of the tools for offsetting is try to buy as much renewable energy as possible. This is all when you try to make your portfolio look more and more green. This is all about carbon, and you try to sequestrate. I mean, one way of carbon sequestration is plantation, right? So these are the things. These are some of the methodologies by which we could reduce our carbon footprint, and we could manage the carbon footprint as well. So many of the companies, they are now limiting their international flights as well. They realized at one point of time that they're accumulating a lot of carbon because of all the air travel that they are doing. So they try to reduce that as well, and try to, even before this pandemic thing, they were becoming more and more digital way of communication. If they have offices located across the globe, instead of traveling, they try to connect digitally. So you have to bring in such kind of an intervention to ensure that your carbon is managed, right? So thank you, everyone. Thank you very much. With this, I would like to end my talk. If you have any query, I'm more than happy to respond. Thank you. So if there is no further query, then I would say that we will take a break of about half an hour, and we will resume again at 3:30. Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Thank you, ma'am.
So much.
Thank you.